Ruchim Aboim B'Shem Hashem. Shem Irgin Shir Terem. I Boston. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's Shaar by Rabbi Yosef Viener Shlita. I'd like to give a big yeshikach to Mr. and Mrs. Dov Nierenberg for sponsoring tonight's Shaar. Have the great source of sponsoring a Shaar, or to put an ad in the dinner journal and be mechazik the Abotzas HaTorah of Irgin Shir Terem worldwide in honor of our upcoming annual dinner, Monday, August 18th. Call 718-851-8651, email ist@yeshivanet.com. Tonight we have the cover to have with us Rabbi Yosef Viener Shlita, Rav Kehilas, Shaar Hashomayim, Wesley Hills, to speak on fake relationships, real obligations, and genuine growth. We'll cover the call on Rav Viener for tonight's drasha.
Build them for over. They'll build them for over 5 feet. Sometimes. Yeah, maybe it's that close. Yeah, it's fine. Shkayach again to Rabbi Bold and the entire Chashuva staff, which you seem to be handling everything yourself. So, Baruch Hashem, the staff is streamlining everything. And it's always an achas to see everybody again. And as I began to look over the marmakemis, things I wanted to discuss, and I had enough time for it, Baruch Hashem, because if you don't come at 1 o'clock, you're never going to get here. So, kanai to her, the traffic, even in the middle of the day, well worth it. But I have a feeling that if we cover 50-60%, we'll be doing well, and it'll give us food for thought. And this particular year, I hope to be coming back to Flatbush for Tisha B'Av, either to celebrate or to discuss what Tisha B'Av is about. And that theme is going to be Mitzvah Shem. Not much time for Chazara, but a continuation. As a matter of fact, this year is feeding on last year's. Last year, if you remember, was the Yearning of being down the Kav Schus, and I still had some of you and many of the people listening trying to taina that some of the cases they really don't have a chiyah to be down the Kav Schus, but they're working on it. So I was down them the Kav Schus when they asked that, and everybody's good and they're all growing. Tonight, as you could tell, I'm surprised I even gave such a toxic title, because each one of these phrases, fake relationships, real obligations, genuine growth. So hopefully we're going to begin to explore the issues and the chiyuvim ben adam l'chaveroi, between adam l'chaveroi and real relationships and not so real. And I would say lahavdil, but it's all ben adam l'makom, between the Eved Hashem and the Ribbon Shalom. And on that note, I grabbed literally on the way out some of the USBs on these subjects. As each year goes by, I bring less and less. Each one has between 100 and 300 on them. So the maker of them tells me that it's gavaldik. You put it in the car and it keeps the place and never forgets. So halavai by all of us, we should retain all the shiurim, myself included. But some of them, there are about 9 series out, 4 or 5 of them are on the table there. And a couple of them, Lifnei Iver, particularly has a lot to do with this subject in terms of the chiyuvim and what we shouldn't be doing. So let's start off with the bad news and we'll work our way up. I say bad news, I'm not going to talk about Yidden, but we are going to highlight some of the things we just laned. And Pinchas, Matas Masai, hopefully we'll get to some Devarim. And if you want a classic example of a fake relationship, so who would you pick from Chumash? So I know what you're thinking if you start from Bereshis, but I'm not picking him because he was a tzaddik except for that nefila and the recovery. Who am I referring to? Who? Kayin? He's called Gainav Das Elyon, so that's a pretty harsh statement in terms of real relationships. But that wasn't necessarily a consistent problem. So anybody mentioned like first generation humanity or second, like to stay away from, because we're dealing with Heilig Tzadikim. He wasn't as Heilig maybe as Hevel and as Adam and Chava, but we'll save that for a different time. The more recent vintage is somebody that's easier to dissect because Chazal do it for us, and that is Bilam. Talk about fake relationships. He's Mamish Geinev Das Elyon from beginning to end. And he's given gifts that nobody else got except for Moshe Rabbeinu. And he's given these gifts so the Umas Elam shouldn't taina. And he takes everything and uses it l'ra, and B'sach HaDvarm, like, starts taining on the Malach. That means taining on a Kosh Baruch Hu, like, what did I do wrong? He's asking B'shas Maisa, what did he do wrong? And every year when we're hearing this and we're listening to this and laning, we should be screaming and yelling, like, what a chutzpah, as he's doing it. So he's going to Das Elyon, he's trying to anyway, you can't do that. But he makes a consistent life pattern out of that. And Baruch Hashem, Klai Yisrael doesn't do that, and Yidden don't do that, but we all do that a little bit when we don't do the right thing, but ask Hashem to help us anyway. And Midas HaRachamim, Hashem always helps us anyway and waits for us to do tshuva. Bilam wasn't doing tshuva. The only spark we see is that he knew where his bread is supposed to be buttered, and he says in his nevuah that he wants to live like Bilam and die like Pinchas. Doesn't work that way. But an attempt he certainly made, because Alam Abba he wanted, he just didn't want to work for it. So, as the pasuk introduced, Vayichar Afalakim Kehilas Hu, and the contrast is unbelievable, because the only other example in Chumash I can think of is by the biggest tzaddik ever, or in the top, I'm not going to make any lists, is Avraham Avinu, when he was told that Yitzchak is going to be Klai Yisrael, and then he's told to Shechtim, and after the Nisayin was finished, there's a Chiddush already. Chazal tell us, after everything was done, he felt he had the right, and Chazal don't criticize this, to ask, the stira here, what was the answer? I didn't ask the kasha because that was the Nisayan, that was the godless Avraham Avinu. And the Kosh Baruch Hu explained there was a diak here that we would have made, Rab Chaim would have made, and Avraham Avinu didn't make in this instance, and that's what made him Avraham Avinu. And that is, I said, bring him up, you brought him up, bring him down. That's such a pasha terrorist, no? Why do we think of that? And it says Avraham Avinu thought about it for 3 long days, but he didn't think he should darshan it over here. Bilam asked a similar kasha, but he asked the B'shas Maisa. He said, you said I shouldn't go, then you said I can go, and now you're upset and I can't go, and it's chutzpah from beginning to end. What he's trying to do, and we have to stay away from this, we're not this bad, Baruch Hashem, nowhere near, is that not in our best moments, we're trying to use the relationship for what we want without fully analyzing that it's not necessarily Ratzon Hashem, and that is all of life, to figure out when you're fooling yourself, when you're not. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol doesn't want anything. He wants us to do the Aveda, to be mative to us, but he wants a real relationship. And a lot of people don't understand it this way. Just wants honesty. If you're asking for something, you have a right to ask for whatever you want. But tefillah is very powerful, we discussed in previous years, and be careful what you ask for, you might get it. What we should be asking for, with the disclaimer, if we're not sure, is that if it's good for me, and it'll help my Avodas Hashem. And unfortunately, the human condition is we often ask for things. I'll give 3 examples. Money. Second example comes to mind. Money. You want the 3rd example? Okay, covered. So I'll get off. We're going to talk a lot about covered. And as from people, as B'nai Torah, we convinced ourselves that we're only asking L'Shem Shamayim, of course, but better be in our pocket to use L'Shem Shamayim than somebody else's. So nothing wrong with asking. We ask for parnasa. Nothing wrong with that. But the relationship has to be honest enough that we're asking Lishma, we're not 100% Lishma, we're working on the Lishma, but it's not all about us. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, to make that relationship honest. Kaviyachol. So, we're not Bilam. Bilam is the extreme example. With that said, as we're dealing with other people, we're going to spend more on the B'adam L'Chavero aspect, because it's all part of the B'adam L'Makom, what Hashem wants from us in building relationships with people. And every aspect of B'adam L'Chavero is supposed to be helping us reach our goal of having a real relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Both are important, not because they're two separate avodas. That's part of, it's not a chiddush, it's pashut. It's all about honesty and doing things lishma, whether it's Hashem tzivoy to do it with other people, or to put on tefillin just between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it's all the same honesty to raise that lishma, and as Al-Chaim Volozhiner says, if we don't get there and we raise it from 20% to 25%, and that takes a whole lifetime, then wonderful. But it's got to be moving. As we do that, we have to be careful not to accuse people. This is just a one example chazara of the whole sugya last year. And it's a very delicate balance between, especially if you're in charge of chinuch, children, if you're in charge of being mechana people, being ma'abitz Torah, you're in charge of making decisions. You got to be careful to be dan l'kas chus. Make sure you're realistic enough that the person is not dangerous, but don't make accusations that don't have clear rayas in that direction. The sugya still insists that everybody's innocent until proven guilty. Certainly by being dan l'kas chus for the Beinoni category. Certainly for the people who are above Beinoni. And I noticed an interesting, I was thinking about the Rashi. There's an Ayelos HaShachar on this Rashi, which I will share with you in a moment, in Parshas Matas, Masay, where Rashi asks why Pinchas was asked to go fight this battle. What's bothering Rashi is Pinchas is a Kayin. Kayinim don't do well in the battlefield, especially hand-to-hand combat, because you only kill people with swords, a couple of arrows if you can keep your distance, but it doesn't always work. So the last person you want is Pinchas. So one malach is he's the Meshua Milchama, he's giving instructions, but from the other Chazal, it doesn't sound like he was just giving instructions. It sounds like he was fighting, and you'll say, they asked the Kasha, how did he kill Bilam? He did. So they were playing, for lack of a better word, Flying Kings, where Bilam was using his kishuf, and Itzis is bringing them down. And they got all the kings, and they got Bilam, and the Dian and the Achronim is, did he actually touch him, or not? And how did he stay away from the Isser? And there are plenty of terutzim. Rashi still asks why he was sent, and there are a number of terutzim. He started the mitzvah of erasing the Chil Hashem and undoing what Bilam had planned, and partially succeeded at. Davar Acher and Rashi, Halach linkam nikmas avi imay shenamar v'madana machru oisai. You notice this, Rashi? This is the surprising answer in the Rashi. Everything else is like the whole parsha or 2 or 3. It's all about the Magefa and Pinchas stepping in and being Mekadosh Shem Shamayim and stopping Bilam and taking Nekama. Rashi says the Davar Acher, it says also for Nekama because he comes partially from the Midyanim and they're bad people. What they do wrong? Rashi says they were involved in Mechiras Yosef. So Avaron Leib and Ayelos HaShachar asks an obvious kasha. He says he doesn't understand. Midyanim are one of the people, there was a whole Hishalshal Sadvarim, if you remember, and he got sold a number of times, and he got down to Mitzrayim. Unfortunately, the Shiftei Ka sold Yosef. Who they sold him to? If you're familiar with any run-of-the-mill average pirate slave traders, when somebody presents them with an Eved, certainly a good strong one who looks intelligent, they don't ask too many questions. And so they don't start asking, where'd you get him? Where'd you get him? A kasha and a maisa? Are you a pirate or you're not a pirate? You know, they shouldn't be a pirate. But there was a slave trade. A different discussion, but there was. So they drove by in their caravan. Baruch Hashem, they're carrying spices instead of oil. And that was the Ishmaelim, and then they were also carrying some good things. And then they pick them up, take them down. They are the Risham of here. He's fighting the battle to take revenge on. It's a good kasha, no? What did they do wrong? So he suggests, based on a Sefer Yashar, that Yosef told them, I'm not an Eved. Take me back to my father. He has a lot of money. You'll get paid well. And I want to go home. And this is out of control. And he said that once, twice, 3 times, begging them. And they didn't listen. So Aaron Leib says, okay, why should they believe him? Every slave would say that. I don't belong here. You have the wrong man. Said, Rishayim, he's taking the Kama? What's the answer? This is my lashon, my understanding of the Kehilas Shachar. The answer is, you got to be honest, and in life, once in a while you get lucky in the Nikarim Divrei Emes. And when you have a fellow in the back seat who looks far more intelligent and doesn't look anything like all the other people who are being sold as slaves, I won't go into that, but like doesn't fit the profile at all, and he keeps saying the same thing over and over again, and he's talking and learning with them, explaining why they can make a lot of money over here, and he's explaining to them why they're short-sighted, and they're ignoring him. That means in their rishus, they wanted to just kidnap him and sell him. And that's not forgivable. So you hear the taina? This is on par. Rashi has the davar acher, that if you didn't see that the person is innocent, and you could have, that's your problem, even though you say, I didn't do it, they sold me, it's on the open market, what do you want from me? That's pretty important for life. No one's perfect, it's not a perfect science, but you could sometimes make accusation. Even when you're doing that and you think you have rayas, you better solidify the rayas first, and the less rayas you have, the more you have to put in, I'm not sure, and I'm not accusing, but just in case, and give like a musa shmuzin about the sugya. You got to be very careful, because if you mark somebody, they're ruined for life, especially if it's a younger adult. I say younger adult till the age of like 89, because people are sensitive. After that, they get more mature. So it's dangerous stuff. So here, Pinchas is going to fight, and Rashi's almost putting it, the davar acher is like usually on par, no? Somewhat. Here we have taking the come against Bilam, against the Magefa, and all the Rishayim, and going back many dairies, the people aren't alive anymore. They should have known Yosef was not slave material, and they ignored him. That's pretty frightening. But that's what Rashi means. That's what Aaron Leib Tain is. Step number 2. It's the summer, and people are in camp, and it's a wonderful experience. And one of the number 1 shailas I get from campers, from the Bochrim, and sometimes from the Bocharetz, whenever you say that. I'm waiting for somebody to, I keep making up that word. It's got to be a word somewhere. But somehow nobody gets lost in that. Bacharetz don't remember. So, Baruch Hashem, they're all asking shaylas. Yeshivas of Beis is doing a great job. So, the number 1 shayla, believe it or not, maybe the number 2, the number 1 shayla maybe is, can I leave something under the bed this year? I said, no, it didn't change this last year. Okay. So, I got to take all the drinks and all the Snapples and everything. That's not a discussion now. The other shayla is, do I really have to say Hamapil? What a Yetzirah, not to say Hamapil? Like, where's that Yetzirah come from? So in camp, it's particularly pronounced. The rest of the year, people, and just, I have a lot of shirim on tefillah, and we talk about Hamapil. There's a fear, an inborn fear, only in America, because we have so much to do at night, that we might not go to sleep and we might talk. If you talk, it's not an avera, and if your wife needs something or the kid's crying, you could, even after Hamapil, tell your wife to please take care of it, or something like that. Don't quote me on that. Or she'll tell you, whatever direction it goes. Lamaisa, you try not to talk. We paskin, it's not a hesek, and the insomniacs get very nervous because the Be'alacha brings a machlekes. We paskin Allah lamaisa, it's on minig olam of trying to go to sleep, and that's all you're responsible for. The reason it comes up on camp matzav and a campgrounds is because the whole purpose of camp is never to go to sleep, as you all remember. So the bochum, for sure, but I remind them they have to get up for shacharis, and then the female versions of them say there's no shacharis bisman by us, and we're here to talk all night, and they are. And that's what makes camp so wonderful for the Bilam and Balak aspect. And taka by them, it's machlekes whether they're mechayav is in a mapil. So that's the number 1 or number 2 shayla in camp. The third shayla, you're wondering, what does this have to do with Bilam and Balak? How did I get that in? You'll say, I just want to remind everybody about a mapil all year round. You shouldn't be so scared. I did, but that's not why it's here. The shaila I'm getting with increasing frequency, not ma'asim b'chol yom, it's a pretty scary, daunting shaila. People, as they get into a mapil, so if they never did it before, they start something like, what's the bare minimum? Because it's in print like 6 pages. So they want to know if I'm starting off. So if you're saying more, please don't whittle it down based on this, but like say Shema. And if you daven Ben Moshe, say Shema, all 3 parshas, with the last pasuk for Zechis to Sis Yitzrayim. And say the bracha, obviously, so bracha, takanas chazal. People, some things are more popular, they like the psukim that you say 3 times, because once you say 3 times, they're at least saying it once, but it got their attention. So certain things I don't have to convince them of, and there are a few other things as you add on to it. And then I mentioned, by the way, the paragraph before Hamapal Kriya Shema, depending on your version in your siddur, it's not clear it's divided into Sfarad Ashkenaz. If you have 7 siddurim at home, there'll be 3 to 4 or something like that. So figure it out. Just do the same thing every night if you haven't figured that out yet. And there's a paragraph before, a wonderful paragraph, that says, before I go to sleep, I want to be meichel everybody in various forms. That's a long mechila. It's like you're being meichel people in a different gilgul. I don't know if that part is that as necessary, but why not cover every gilgul if you can? But en lenoesik ministeris, lamaisa, some heilige yid wrote it, but it's based on Mar Zutra's statement in the Gemara Megillah, as you all know, that they want to know how he had arichas yomim, and one of the many things said over there is that he never went to sleep in a machlekes and somebody with tainas, and he was meichel everybody. That's the source for this din. So you're wondering, so what's the shaila? So the shaila is as follows, from honest people who were brave enough to ask the shaila. They said they can say that, or part thereof. There's a very nice yirotzen afterwards, as you all know. They want to know, there are a couple of people they really don't want to be meichel. What should they do? So, I like, people are honest. Achshe dereh. So I said, well, there is a machlekes achronim. These are just the Rosh Prakim. We only have an hour, or an hour and 5 minutes. And Baruch Hashem, we have what to talk about every year, and this is why. But there is a machlekes. Many achronim say that if you don't mean it, it's not chal. Now, that's easy to understand. So, if you didn't have him in mind, there's not going to be chal anyway, and still, why not just say a generic statement, and it'll cover the other 98% of the people you're not fighting with. So he told me, it's not 98. So I said, okay, I'm not interested in hearing the whole list. It's the most recent shaila. So I'm just being honest. I said, I appreciate that, but whatever, 50%, 10%, he runs a lot of businesses, and it's a little hectic during the day, and a lot of people involved. Whatever the percentage is, he said, you have my just say a generic thing. So it doesn't work pashas for the other people. Believe it or not, there are some achreinim who say that it does work because we have a klal, dvarim shabalev and a dvarim. And if you said you meichel everybody, then you would just meichel everybody. That's gavaldik, no? So I said you have nothing to lose because like the achreinim, you meichel them anyway, it's probably better for you. And like the other achreinim, you're still going to work on it. And I got pushback from almost everybody who was asking. He said, no, if it works, I don't want it to work. Okay, very human. Why not? He said, we're still trying to get to the bottom of it. Okay. Not ridiculous. So one fellow asked me, after he heard about the generic thing, it might be chal, he said, can I cover myself and spell out his name? Chutz mi Chaim Yankel? I said, please don't do that. We're not looking for kitrugim before we go to sleep. He's announcing, except for Chaim Yankel, he's going to go down the list. He brings the tzedler with him, and he goes, I don't think that's a good idea either. Just libi yomili. So, if it doesn't work, it won't work. If you really are nervous, it might work. Dvarim shabalev and dvarim. So maybe say I'm meichel most of the people, or some of the people, or anybody. People, they're very good people. They just struggle with this. So, b'sach hadvarim, it came up. There's tefillah zaka. He said, yeah, he remembered that. It doesn't always come on time. I said, you should come on time. Because tefillah zaka sort of says the same thing. He said he was struggling with that also. I said, but you got to struggle with that like during Elul and come to some conclusion by Yom Kippur, so you could beat the rush and start before Tisha B'Av. It does say in the Chai Adam, wrote Tefillah Zaka, and it does say that. The only exception over there, if you remember, is except for somebody who owes me money. That already, if he owes you money, he owes you money. You don't have to be meichel that. It's an important nakuda because that tells me, again, all good people, that people are struggling with this and we never do anything that's not comfortable until we have to. So people put it off during the day and then it comes at night and all of a sudden they open the siddur and there's a whole statement already, and they're not ready for it. And I'm not going to be machriya on this machlekes achronim. The second sheet of the is a chiddush. But they tie the dvarim shablev and the dvarim by everything else. He said the answer might be not when you're talking to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's when you're doing transactions with other people and you didn't put in a tanai that you now want to put in a dintera. Well, you didn't spell that out before. Unless it's muchuch dvarim shablev b'lev kaladam, as Taisa says. Over here, talking to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, as a Kadosh Baruch Hu knows what you mean. L'chayra, that would be the debate whether that is a chilik or not. Something to think about before tonight. So after marriage, you have about an hour or two or three. And if I've had people who told me they're now getting into Amapil and they're going to come back to me when they get to that paragraph. They first want to streamline the other main things. Okay, as long as everybody's growing. The next few examples are actually from our Chashava teenagers. And our young adults are all steiging. So I thought the questions were very good. It's a part of a list. I have a lot of lists from various yeshivas and other meisters. So I just cherry-picked over here 3 of them nagea to our sugyas of what we have to think about. These shaylas come up. What do I do in this situation? A friend seeks compassion and sympathy for something that happened to them and something they did, but I see them as in the wrong. So that's a great question. They're asking them for validation. They got into a fight with somebody and they tell their friend, and like, what do I do? They want me to make them feel good. Apparently, from the question, person asking the question feels that, no, they're actually wrong. So, if you recall, part of being dan l'kav zchus is to explain why they meant well. The chiyuv tochacha, which nobody likes doing, and people are still trying to convince me there's no chiyuv b'zman hazeh, which is absolutely not true. And I'm sure we had one summer we spent on that. It's a pasuk in Chumash. You can't get rid of a pasuk in Chumash. It's kama v'kama gemaras. Gemara says that we don't know how to do it that well, and you have to be careful, and you can be very careful. Whenever you give somebody tochacha about anything, you say, I'm just as bad as you are, I'm just as good, but I have faults, and I'm not better at this, and I've worked on it, even if you have to make that up. And then tell them, let's work on it together. There's a way to disarm people, and it won't always work, but there's a way to do it. The ikar chiyuv of ben chaver is to grow with people. That's the purpose of friends and family. And I can't overemphasize that point. It doesn't mean you should go around giving mussar to people all day. It means you should figure out a way to have them join you, and you be mechazik of them be mechazik you. And here's a golden example and a golden opportunity. Let's assume for a moment the shayl is right and the friend is wrong, but the friend is coming to them and they feel, well, bad, they're bent out of shape. Like, what do they do? And are they right? They're looking for, like, don't worry, you're right and you're great, but they're great, but what if they're not right over here? So the answer is you can give, validation is always a great catchword for the modern era. You've got to validate everybody. The problem is, how do you validate everybody if half of them are wrong? That's called ziyuf hatera. The Marshal holds it's Yahar Vayavar. You can't do that. What you can do is you could start validating and say, look, I had this similar matzah. Either you did, you didn't, you almost did. Make them feel good. And say, I understand what you said. I understand why it happened. However, maybe it's another point of view, but I'm with you. I would have made the same mistake if it's really a mistake. Or it might be a mistake. At least put a doubt that they have to make amends and start cleaning up the mess that they're coming to you for a hechsher stempel on. So being a friend does not mean, this goes against a lot of what you hear from the Ummah Olam, is being a friend is always being there for them, whether they're right or wrong. The answer is it's always being there for them and helping them. And if they're right, you mechazik them. If they're wrong, you don't lash into them and you don't lord over them and you don't become a Baal Gaiva, that you don't know what you're talking about. You explain it to them as we just explained, that I'm not good at this either, but I'm not even sure, even if you are sure. But encourage them to ask a shayla, somebody who might be sure. If you validate from beginning to end, you're mattering an isser that doesn't have a heter, possibly. That's called ziyaf hater. That's why this is such a good question. So it's all about making them feel good and making them feel good that others have made this mistake, and explore with them that perhaps you're right, that perhaps it's a mistake. Next. That's why I mentioned they were teenagers. Teenagers range from 13, well, it used to be from 13 to 19 officially. Now it's later. Again, 81, 82, whatever. It's a work in progress. This question, this is not asked lekanter. This is a serious question. Why do people who are older deserve more respect? Their age is not something they earned. I almost fell off my seat when I read this, but I said, this one I marked down. I put a little check next to it. I said the people at Yearning deserve at least an answer to that very good question. We live in an age, where youth has their own opinions. That's fine, but at least she or he are asking, and I want to know, what's pshat? There's really only one basic answer to this, but there's a second part which is important for our sugya. The main answer is it's Exeris HaKasuv, and it's a pasuk or 2 or 3. Like your parents of the generation before, they're giving you the Maseira, Bimnei Seva Tokum, that's Bnei Zakein. These are all Ferish Psukim, so we don't really have to be Derish Time at Akra, and it's Exeris HaKasuv. That's the real answer, you got to say that first. Sefer Chinuch does tell us that there's an inyan to try to darshan without changing the din, darshan Time at Akra to understand the Musar and the Ashkafa behind it. That's what the Sefer Chinuch does, and other Rishonim as well. And we also do it, just be careful not to change the din. We don't pass like Rab Shimon. We're not Derish Tam Akra. Rab Shimon uses it a couple times in all of Shas. So, what's the answer? The answer is that their age is actually something they earned. It's called experience. And the Gemara says that. The Gemara says that even about Akum. It says, I got it, Mikami Sabi. He's a man with experience, an older gentleman, even if he's not a Yid. Not a chiyuv there, but it's an inyan to be makir. Part of the reason I picked this one, part of being dan l'katzchus and part of trying to go out of your way to learn from people is to understand your place and understand that somebody who's older or somebody who's not older but more experienced in a certain thing, it might be more experienced, it might have another angle to bring to the sugya that you're struggling with, might have something to say. And if we're not looking for the good in people, we say, what good did they, even Nakum, what good does he have to offer? The answer is he has life experience, so look for the good in anybody and maybe it'll teach you something. That was the second part of my answer. It's Exeris HaKasuv. The Torah is actually giving us a tziva to teach us hadracha, that you can learn mikol adam, and the more they've been around, the more you can learn from, but you have to see the good in them. And at a time when everything is all about what makes you feel good and what's in it for me, that's hard to do. And we're going to deepen that theme as we go along. The third one. Which concepts in Chazal can help me not to overshare? Now, when I first read this, overshare, does that mean like it's an IPO and there's a limited amount of shares? Like, what does oversharing mean? No, anybody, when you hear this, I'm not sure where they're going with this, but the next line they explain. Again, very honest, and I always welcome honest shailas because especially if they're a little bit younger, they have to learn this because usually what they're asking is pretty key to Yiddishkeit. So what can help me not overshare? Which means they understand already they're oversharing too much. What are they oversharing? Why should I want to keep personal achievements private? That's a very good, succinct, powerful question. So now, I can understand Lamafreya, what they meant by oversharing, and they detect, because we're raising good children, they detect there's something not so pushy, maybe we're taking this from the Goyim. The Goyim is all about oversharing all day and all night, and we would say, get a life, because what they tell me, nothing ever happened, or we would say nothing was chal, unless you post it all over the world, whatever you're doing. Because people are so insecure with what they're doing, they have to advertise and get 20 million likes to be able to know that the decision they just made to go to the park was the correct one. That's a serious problem, which I understand is getting more serious by the moment. I'm not accusing this teenager of being on social media. They just have friends, and they're with their friends, and they have this taiva, and there are milas to it. I would say Yetzirah, but it's not all bad. To share, the question is, when am I oversharing? It's an excellent question and very nogea to our discussions tonight. And their backup question to explain what they mean is, well, I think it might be gaiva, and that's why I think maybe I'm oversharing, and I don't know what the balance is, but why shouldn't I? I want to brag about my personal achievements. Is that a fair question? So what is the balance? This is a pretty crucial concept that we've heard before, I hope, but it's not really focused on. Chaverim are very important. Chaver Shaf is very important, and the social activity of people, to be with people, is extremely important for anybody's mental health, and Ruchni is everybody's growth. The 100% Lishma in this, which nobody is near, again, if we're starting at 8%, moving it to 12%, or 20 to 30, 40 to 50, as long as we know the aside to work on it, is Hashem put us in this world, as Ramchal says, to be mative with us, and Hashem wants to spend Kaviyachol all the time, giving us the opportunity to be mative with others. That's why Hashem created billions of people, because you can't avoid them. I know many people, some people cheering, not for COVID, Rahmatullahi Islam, but cheering at one of the byproducts. One person told me, more than one, it's great, I get to sit in my room just on my computer, I don't have to deal with anybody. Okay, also very human, but that's not the purpose of Avodas Hashem. The purpose of Avodas Hashem is to have the opportunity every minute to deal with thousands of people and be mative. And this is one of these examples. This is a lifetime of Avodah, and all depends on the kavanah. I'll explain why right now. Your purpose to be mative to somebody else, to make them feel good, and to listen to them tell you about their achievements, and to let them brag, so to speak, and make them feel good. That's why you're here. And they're here to do the same for you. So they're asking, am I oversharing? Is this too much? I want to talk about my achievements. Very normal and somewhat healthy. And you're going to do a fair amount, and it's never going to be 50-50. The relationship is in big danger when it's 80-20 or 90-10, and it's often like that. So that's what you have to stay clear of, but it's not going to be exact 50-50 in every techufa. It's true in friendships, it's true in a marriage, true in, with children, true with everybody. Lamaisa, you don't have to get it 50-50. You have to be doing it lishma, and mamela in normal healthy relationships, it'll fall out over time, roughly 50-50, 60-40, 70-30, depending on who's the relative tzaddik toward the other one, and that's perfectly fine, as long as you're having kavanah to be native to them. And you won't lose out. You won't lose out for two reasons. You're doing Ratzon Hashem, you never lose out. And Hashem never has us lose out by Olam Hazeh. The secret, which is not a secret to anybody in the room, but to anybody on the outside, is that people who are constantly working and working hard in their Avodas Hashem are actually much happier by Olam Hazeh also. So the more you're being native, the happier you are. And per this question, the more you claim your bragging rights and you overshare, it might be very uplifting at the moment. It doesn't feel so geschmack afterwards. Hence the question, am I oversharing? The answer is, it's not percentages. It's what's your kavanah. Unless it's 80-20, 90-10, they can't get a word in edgewise. Then it's gaiva, and it's not a healthy relationship. That's the answer to this question. But the key is, no matter where the percentages come out, the key is, what is your kavanah? Are you here to have friends so they are there for you and you have somebody to schmooze with and they come to your simchas, which is all wonderful? Or are you here to lift them up and go to their simchas and they're here to do the same thing for you, which is the same result? Completely different avodas Hashem. That's the yesod, that's the godless of this question. This person recognized that, we're trying to move toward anivas, not gaiva. You have to feel good, and you should be talking about your accomplishments, but you should be listening to them, and they should be asking you for your accomplishments. And it all depends on the kavanah of the direction you're pushing in. It doesn't make a difference where it lands. What happens when you do have a little falling out? So the Rambam brings down on the pasuk of L'sisa sachicha bilvavecha. A lot of people, even though this is Beferish and the Rambam and the Ramban, this is shot in the pasuk. If you have a taina on somebody, first thing to do is try to work on it. That maybe it was nothing. You make a mountain out of a molehill, and don't bring it up and create a fight. And often that can be done. Takes working on, but that can be done. The Rambam will spell that out after he tells you what to do when it can't be done and it's not working. You have a chiyuv d'oraisa, not to harbor it, because you're over on l'sisna sachicha b'vavecha. Rather, the next pasuk, bring it up. Maybe it's a misunderstanding, and maybe they didn't realize what they did, and they'll apologize. And if it's somebody you're working with that might apologize and might clear it up, that's an important nakuda, which we'll get to in a moment, then you have a chiyuv to do so. We see the lashon of the Rambam, this in Huchas Deis, Perek Vov, Halacha Vov, and onwards. Kishayechta ish leish, when people bavel each other, get into a fight, they say things they shouldn't say, they do things they shouldn't do. Lo yistamenu v'yishtak, don't just harbor ill will, because it'll grow and will fester. Kamei shenemar b'rishayim, a pella. Chazal say this, but the example given in Tanakh, this is the poster boy example, is not by somebody you would have listed as your top 10 Rishayim. He did something horrible, and he went to Gehenna until his father got him out with a lot of tefillahs. But he wasn't raised a Russia. You wouldn't think this is the midah that it goes down in history as this was his big mistake. As you know, I'm referring to Avshalom. Avshalom was very upset and wanted to take care of the honor of his sister Tamar, and he had major tainas on Amnon for good reason. If you know the story, if you don't, we're not going to go into it now. And he walked around with serious tainas, and it got worse and worse and worse. And he was so angry he didn't say a word, good or bad, not a good morning, nothing. They lived in the same palace or in the same compound. And we know what happened in the end. He killed Amnon, and that triggered that David HaMelech was furious with him, and they never had a full reconciliation, and that wasn't David HaMelech's fault, and Avshalom ends up rebelling and loses his Olam Hazeh, and almost loses his complete Olam Haba, just from having something fester. Ella, so what is the chiyuv? Mitzvah lav l'adiya v'layma lav lama sisali kach v'kach lama chatasali b'dvar planish nemar chayat achichas amisecha. Besides being the makar for general tochacha to help people grow when you're good at it and in a way that will be effective, possibly. Remember, the number one answer is no chiyuv tochacha, but they're not going to listen. Most people don't like getting tochacha, and most people don't listen. But if there's some chance, mir amatzi, they'll listen, then there's a chiyuv. Here, it's a very limited view of what tochech is, and that is you have a taina. Either you're right or you're wrong. Bring it up and get it out in the open and deal with it. And hopefully solve it. And of course, the person being asked shouldn't be an achzari. If it's anybody early on in Chumash who could have had tainas on somebody else, it was Avraham Avinu on Avimelech, and he didn't, and he forgave him, and he davened for him. The Rambam then says, if you don't want to deal with it because it's very difficult, or he's a very difficult person and you don't think it's going to get anywhere, you don't want to start up because the guy's a hedger. What's a hedger? A hedger is an amaris, but he doesn't know how to learn. Why is that a problem over here? The answer is it's always a problem. The question is how many problems? If he doesn't learn, he's missing out on the biggest mitzvah in Kol Torah Kula. And if he doesn't learn, he's going to be an amaritz, Lo Amar is Chayte means that Amar it will be Chayte, and he doesn't have a good Hashkafas L'chaim, and he's not working on himself, and you can't reason with such a person. So the Rambam says, if he's a Hedjip Yeser, Oisha Haisa Daita Mishubeshes. Two categories of people where you could try to bring it up, it's not going to work. Either he's not all there, it's in the same sentence, or he's an Amar, he's a Hedjip. That's pretty jarring. But either way, if he doesn't have a good Hashkafas L'chaim, then it's all about him, and he's not busy working on his Avodas Hashem, and his Bilam and Balak is part of Avodas Hashem, and he has plenty of time to kill because he's not learning anyway. I'll get to a recent case or two or three when I'm dealing with that. Good people, I just got to find the Pintel Yid. But Rambam calls it Amaratzes, he's a Hedjip Yeser, or he's not all there. I don't know which one's the category somebody would want to be in, neither. If, therefore, the chances of success are extremely low, and he works on himself, he's meichalim, and he really doesn't have time, he lets go of it, which means, if you can't drop the baggage, then you got to bring it up, and in the best way possible, hopefully there'll be shalom. It's a passing chumash, can you imagine? A lot of people don't know, and they're just like, they're not dealing with it. The Rambam says if you can deal with it by dropping the baggage, then that's gavaldik, less risk. It won't be another blow up, and do that, and you'll have more time for everything else. I had a mice at the beginning of the year. It wasn't only at the beginning of the year, but Baruch Hashem, you get to help a lot of people, and I spend a lot of time trying to remind people, even though they're coming with very specific tainas, it transcends that. And this is what we have to always keep in mind. It happens to everybody. And they're harping on something, and they're bringing it up, and the other person is not exactly agreeing with them, and the fight's getting worse and worse and not going away. And the best argument, which I hope works, sometimes I don't see it working right away, sometimes it works later, sometimes I haven't found out yet that it works, but Taina is you're starting a major machlokes, and then it sometimes snowballs into other people getting involved, and then lawsuits, and then Rahman al-Islan, a case of Masira. I said, there's no heter for Masira. I don't care how angry you are. Like, Masira puts you in a completely different gap. How did a person that was a good guy, how did he get to Masira? He's so angry, wants to take the comma, and he tried to bring it up, and the guy's not seeing it his way. So, when I have the time, which I never do, and I even hear the tainas, it's never 100-0 or 99-1, and Ruven shouldn't be forcing Shimon to see it his way. He certainly shouldn't be thinking the machlekes. The main argument is, we're here for Avodas Hashem. You have time for this? Can you sell me some time? You have like extra schusim to be screaming and yelling? I'd like to buy some. Halacha l'maisa, you can't do that. I know there are a lot of stories floating around. It's not for sale, and you can't do an IPO and maisim tevim and sell them and share the shares, and that doesn't really work. Despite, I know you're all going to ask me, that's a kasha l'maisa, but you can't do that. But Rahman al-Islan, this is what you're going to spend your time and your energy on? So one guy told me, he says, I have a lot of money. I said, I'm aware of that. I've been meaning to discuss that with you. Because the stuckers, he says, I give a chaimish. One guy told me that. I said, the Chafetz Chaim has 6 scenarios you should be giving more. 6, not 1. He said, really? He said, stay afterwards, I'll list them for you. You tell me if you have any money left. I said, what? This is what you're doing with your day? Just continuing in my. People get so stuck because it's all about them, because they didn't learn the basics of what we discussed in the first half hour, and that is you're only here to interact with people, the billions of people around you, to be able to help them grow, and they're going to help you grow, and try to get along with people. You can't get along with everybody, which is why we have a pasuk of Lo Sisas Achicha B'Vavecha and what to do about it, and sometimes you can't do anything about it. But to start mochamas that take up hundreds of hours, and Lashon Hara is off the charts, and then it gets into wasting money and missing, like, they started off good people. They're just getting into domains that no firm person belongs. This can happen if you don't realize why you're here. And I said the second part because even if you aren't able to work in Bilam B'Chavero, have Rahmanas on your time and your money. Like, what are you doing? How do you have time? You have another hour or 2 a day. Why don't you learn something? That's an effective thing to use in your mind when you're embroiled in something. You just got to step back and say, like, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, and the Nakama is very sweet, but who has time for this? I'm preaching to the converted, because after a long day of learning, working, and doing many other things, you still coming to a shiur. So you're obviously making the time. The message has to be for anybody who's Shomer Torah mitzvahs, who's a basic maimin. Can you honestly say Hashem wants you to do it? So, of course, the closing line, if I didn't convince them yet, is yes, Hashem wants them to do it. And I asked, why, pray tell? And I'm praying. They say, because it's the principle of the thing. That's always the ending line. The problem is it doesn't end once you say that line. Because principle thing means that I feel my covet has not been done justice to, and it's all about Nakama right now. Very human, very, very destructive. This is the Akdama, the basics. I don't know why it says 10 to 10 over there, but we'll see what we can cover. The basic Yesod, which is, for some people, maybe counterintuitive. It's like, but on the Chavero, there are a certain set of mitzvahs, half the Tag mitzvahs, that's a lot. Basically boils down to bitachon. If you really believe, as David HaMelech taught us, not only in Tehillim many times, but in his own life, the lowest point, he's running away Taka from Avshalom, doesn't know where it came from. It hit them from left field. They had no inkling this is coming. David HaMelech and his men ran out of Yerushalayim, if you remember, with the clothes on their back. They had no supplies. They had no food. It was really bad. And tremendous nisayon and kapara for David HaMelech. To add insult to injury, literally, as they're leaving with no food, no supplies, no weapons, and they realize if there's going to be any pushback, they need food and supplies and weapons, which Chasdei Hashem wanted David HaMelech back on the throne. David HaMelech wasn't convinced, and David HaMelech said, because he's David HaMelech, I have different roles in life. If Hashem doesn't want me to come back, then I won't come back. If Hashem wants me to come back, we're going to have to figure this out. So as he's leaving and crying and doing further tshuva, Shemi ben Gera, who is, that's complicated, one of the Gedolei Chashuvei Hadar in terms of his learning. He was Shlomo Melech's Rebbe. You couldn't get more complicated than that, because he leaves instruction with Shlomo Melech to sort of take care of him. And what that means in places close to Brooklyn, like Staten Island usually means he shouldn't leave this role. But David HaMelech wasn't being vindictive. He wanted him to have a kapara, but he didn't say kill him. Because if you remember from the Sukkim, he was meichel him on the spot. Yaakov was with David. Just words for the wise. If you ever want to insult a very powerful person, don't do it when Yaakov is standing around. Because Yaakov was Yaakov, and he was standing right with David HaMelech, and he basically turned to David HaMelech, do you want me to take off his head now or in 5 seconds from now? Like, well, why are you listening to this? He's standing there being mechayev, megadev, he's throwing mud at him, he's throwing stones at him, and calling him all sorts of names. And David HaMelech is listening. No? So you know what David HaMelech answered? Hashem amar lo kalel. Hashem Yotza Davar. So this is not the time. I know this isn't exciting for me. It's a kapara. This is not the time. That's classic, if you can use the word vintage, David HaMelech. This is his whole life and the whole Sefer Tehillim. It's hard to keep that in mind, and it's hard to do that. We're not David HaMelech, but we have to strive to learn the lessons, and it all boils down to bitachon, that everything that happens, whether it happens as what we call an act of God, as somehow the insurance companies get very frum when they don't want to pay for something. You know that line, that they pay for everything, that this is not covered. So maybe they're right, maybe they're not, but our job is the act of God. When things happen in nature, it's a little easier to see. When it's somebody else, we intuitively feel, but it's the wrong intuition, that that's not an act of God. He has Bechira, and he's got to pay for this. You know what? He has Bechira, and maybe he'll pay for it, and he probably will. It's not your business. Hashem Amar Lo Kalel. That is what's brought down under Nakama in the Sefer Achin. It brings this example from David HaMelech. That's a lifetime of working on bitachon. So now we're learning something that we put bitachon in the Bilam and Balak category. No, it's all mitzvahs, which is Bilam Chaver, Bilam Lamakam, which are all Bilam Lamakam, and you can't possibly deal with anybody else if you're constantly worried about what they can do to you, what they did to you, and what you have to be careful about because you're nervous about them. And most people deal with this every single day. And David HaMelech says it's irrelevant. Hashem amalek halal. If you're going to get the aggravation, you can get it anyway. And if you're not deserving, it's not going to happen. It's irrelevant. Your job is to, if he's repentant and he's willing to say he's sorry and he's wrong, to talk to him about it. And if he's not repentant, to stay away from him and deal with the other 3 billion people on planet Earth. You don't have to be everybody's best friend. But you cannot take it as this is not part of Hashem's purview, Chalila, and this I got to take care of myself. There is no such thing. That's the lesson from David HaMelech, and I'm just picking the recent examples. The Hafladik and Meshach Chachma, last week's parsha. We just learned this. You're all familiar with the Rashi on the pasuk of Yeshabad Mos Kain Gadol Asher Mashach Asab Hashem and HaKodesh. So Rashi brings down from the Gemara Marcus, Asher Mashach Isai. This murderer B'Shegeg wasn't Meshach the Kain Gadol. He probably had nothing to do with the process. And the Gemara dashes over there that he leaves the Miklat on the Patira of the Kain Gadol, but Shem HaShachasa is if he has a Patira before the sentencing of the Din, the new Kain Gadol is the one that he's got to wait for. Meshach Chachma says, the short Meshach Chachma on the Pasuk, Lamanei Chavei, got to look it up, it's a Pella. And that's why everything here boils down here. He's all nervous. He killed somebody b'shegeg, and that means he didn't have enough schusim, and there's a lot going on in his head. Now he has to run to the Amikla. He might be there a short time, might be there a very long time. And if they're just getting the new Kain Gadol in, it might be a very long time indeed, depending on how old he is. They didn't elect Kainim Gedalim who were 21 years old, Mistama. But this is the new timeline. So the Meshach Chachma wants to know, so what's the pasha on the pasuk? Asher Mashach Isai. They're making a drasha for it, but Lamaisa, he wasn't Meshach. What does he have to do with the Kain Gadol? Listen to what the Meshach Chachma says. He says he has a lot to do with the Kain Gadol. Little does he know, little does the Kain Gadol know. But the Kain Gadol that was selected in part because of the cheshbon of this guy. In Hashomayim, when anybody's El Gedula, when anything gets anything in life, there are a million cheshbenes, zev, gerim. So he says one of the things that are gerim over here is the fact that this guy killed somebody b'shegeg in the middle of the proceedings, and this new Kain Gadol out of the 20 they could have picked, it's a process. It's a tremendous schus, tremendous achrayus. He was picked based on his longevity that will be, or lack thereof, depending on what this Ritzach needs. That means, again, we're all interconnected, and Akash Baruch Hu is deciding, and it has nothing to Asher Mashach Isai. He was responsible, and he got the job. There are a million rights like that, but that's some Meshach Chachma. It just said, like, after all the Gemara Marcus, like, it's a drasha, it's up to him. What's shot in the pasuk? So he says Hitaka was involved, even though he never met him before. Moving to Parshas Devarim, even though we have a lot more from Atas Maseh. This one is a little bit, please don't misquote this. Baruch Hashem, you can't misquote anything. It's recorded in triplicate. That and a token got me on a train, and I will come back to Flatbush to find out what's going on with the trains, because we don't have any in Muncie. They told me there are no more tokens, there's no more Easy Pass, there's no more anything. It's okay, it's all for free, Baruch Hashem. Lamaisa, the pasuk, if you have a chumash near, you look it up afterwards. It's well known. Kikat and Gagadol Tishmun. It talks about the Beis Din. The Sanhedrin has to listen to all the cases, listen to the people's machlekes, listen to their tainas, and deal with the case and paskin the shayla. Rashi brings down very famous chazal. Shechaviv alacha din pruta kedin shameya. There's no chilek between a shava pruta. Tzad holds it's something you could buy something with. Oh, there's a chaylik, there's a big nafkamina for pigeon, meiser, and like in Eretz Yisrael. What is the smallest amount you can buy something with now? I went shopping here. I don't know if it's more expensive than Muncie or less, but it's not a penny. Let's put it that way. No, you have any idea what it is? Can you buy something with a quarter? Whatever a shavar boot is. It's a small amount. No one's going to a din Torah for 25 cents. But Lamaisa, Rashi says, the Chazal say, then I have to be willing, and sounds like there's nothing wrong with the person bringing the din Torah, because money's money, you took my money, I deserve it back. If you have a taina, it doesn't make a difference whether it's a quarter, $1, or $1 million. That's the Rashi. Recently, somebody asked me, they're very angry at somebody, and they have a time on them for X amount of money. I asked, because I know he's asking me advice, not a shayla. Sometimes it's both, but I know this guy, he's a good guy. I said, how much is it? He said, well, my taina, his taina. I said, give me your best estimate, your most robust prediction of what he owes you. I won't tell you the number, but if you go shopping tonight, you might spend it all. Tonight's Wednesday, shopping for Shabbos. Not a lot of money, not a pruta. In the hundreds of dollars, but he was very annoyed. No, so I'm not going to tell him something against the Chazal. So first I read him his rights. I said, it's a pasuk in Parashat Dvarim. We're going to learn it this Shabbos. Kakat Gagadol, and you have rights, and they have obligations to don it, and he has obligation to pay you. And then he put in for good measure. It's the principal thing, because I don't want Rahman al-Islam that he should go to Gehenna. He says, Zaganov. I said, I'm sure it's all the Shema. That you want that. That's Gavaldik. That's also true. And it's all good. He knows something is coming. He said, okay, so that's what I assumed. So that's the end of the discussion. I said, no. I said, now we go back to what we spoke about here. I didn't tell him we were speaking about this, but spoke about 10 minutes ago. And I asked him a few other facts about the case, who the connector was involved. I said, you realize you're going to start World War III and IV over this? And then he repeated, he said, I'm a little concerned about it. I said, I'm more concerned than you are. And you make more money than that per hour. So of course he repeated, I know, but it's the principle of the thing, and you can't let people walk all over you. I can't stop him from going, and the pasuk says we treat every din Torah and he has a right to go for it. Pasuk doesn't say anywhere, and the Chazal doesn't say anywhere. It says Beis Din has to treat it with the same severity. You also have to be smart, and I gave him a bracha. I asked him how long he plans on living. He said a very long time. I said, I hope so, at least to like 750, because just for shaylas like this, you're going to waste like a year or two. I said, you make more per hour. Why does this make any sense whatsoever? So when he starts repeating about the principle, I said, you mean nakama? He said, no. I repeated it again. By the second, third time, he said, well, I can honestly say nakama is not the only driving factor. I said, we're getting somewhere. I said, what percentage? Give me an honest answer. So he said he's working on it, should be less than Roiv. He doesn't want the guy to go to Gehenna. It's only like 48% nakama. I said, it's not even Botel B'Shishim. I said, it's going to take 100 hours. What are you doing? And remember, I covered myself. I told him it's a Rashi coming up. You'll see it. And when you get to it this Shabbos, you can think of me and don't get too excited about it, because I'm telling you, this is not Ratzon Hashem in this situation. He says, well, I should just get away with it? I said, I know the guy. I didn't say I wasn't going to speak to him. I said, you shouldn't start World War III over this. That's pretty important for a pasuk coming up in a few days, especially during the 9 days before Tisha B'Av. Erev Tisha B'Av, as a matter of fact. Is that not everybody has rights. This is the slogan of society. I got rights. I got to exercise my rights, and we're suing everybody left, right, and center. Get a life. There are only X amount of hours in the day, and on a good day, B'nai Torah tell me they don't have enough time to learn, and they need more time. Or they don't have enough time to take a second job to pay the bills, whatever it is. This is not going to help them pay the bills. This is going to cause a lot of lashon hara, mitzi shemer, a lot of mudslinging, and who knows what else. So part of these cheshbenis in life is you have a lot of rights. You got to first figure out what does Hashem want you to do in every situation. And many of the things we brought up were just the Rashi Prokim, and with the few minutes we have left, I'm going to skip over half of them as we prophesized. Of course, Nevu only goes to Katanim and other people, so we won't make such a claim. Lamaisa, there's a shtickle, runs about 3-4 pages in the Oz Nidbaru. he has tshuvas and tshuvas and tshuvas. Very familiar with his tshuvas. They used to call him Rabbi Binyamin Tzaddik. He was a Yid who lived in Bnei Brak, and Talmid Chacham Muflug, and he, Binyamin Zilber, and he wrote many tshuvas. It started off as letters and correspondence, and then they would ask him shilas back, and then each tshuva starts off with like 7 shilas, and he ties them all. Always fascinating. So, in the middle of a tshuva that talks about some Ben Adam Chaveru issues and many other issues as well, he brings up the fact that in the time of David HaMelech, toward the end of his life, there was a kitrug on Klal Yisrael that caused a magefa. 70,000 people died before they got it under control. Rachmana litzlan. And Chazal tell us that the reason it happened, there must have been a very high madrega, because you're waiting to hear like what Avera triggered this. Besides the one mentioned, the pasuk, what happened there with the counting and other things going on, but what was behind the scenes? What triggered the whole thing? Chazal tell us that what triggered it is the fact that it was pretty close to the Zman where Klal Yisrael should have had a Beis HaMikdash, and they weren't asking for it, and if they were, not enough in terms of pressing for it, of wanting it, and they were primed for it, and they didn't ask enough. So he mentions the tikkun in a gullus where that's our nisayon. For 2,000 years, we should know some such things. It wasn't as much of a nisayon, because if every morning in Europe, which for most of the Kufa was fraught with danger, and crusaders and Cossacks and who else would be coming to do damage, Rachmana litzlan, you'd have to be reminded that we don't belong here and that we should yearn for the Gula. We're not looking to change things over here, and we're looking to figure out how to want it and still keep things safe, because on our madrega we really can't handle too much tumult, because we're spoiled in a positive way and we're not looking to change it. I was born here also. Lamaisa, people ask, how do you yearn? That's what the 3 weeks is all about. How do you yearn for the Gula and the Beis HaMikdash? We haven't had the Beis HaMikdash in a long time. We don't really understand Karbanos. We read in all the Svarim that Karbanos are the source of bracha and source of kapara and the Aveda, and it's all true, and we're miming that that's true, but it's hard to feel it. So let me give a little bit of an eitzah, which is very much to do with our sugya, and that is that everybody's focusing on the lack of Aveda, lack of Karbanos, lack of the Ashras HaShechina, which manifested itself on Har Bayis, lack of the reminder. You see 10 Nisan, you walk in, just a chizuk, you see from that. The Aliyah L'Regel. There was another component which was very much part of all this, front and center, and that is the Sanhedrin HaGadol was in the Lishkas HaGazis. They weren't there just because you need a Supreme Court somewhere, a real Supreme Court, not the ones we're dealing with. It was there because that was Kimitzian Teitzei Torah, that was the source of all the Chachma and all the Siyata Shmaya. And Bezman Sheklai Yisrael Shari Alad Masam. And we had a Mikdash, and we had a Sanhedrin. When things started unraveling, Sanhedrin, if you remember, was Gula even before the Beis Mikdash was destroyed, but that was just telling you what was coming. I think what we can identify with the most is the fact that we're missing a Sanhedrin HaGadol. That's not at all a taina. We have wonderful Tamil Chamim and Batei Dinim that are trying their best under very difficult circumstances. You know why it's so difficult? It's very hard to enforce things because we're in Gullus. We live in a democracy. And everybody has their opinion, and they just go somewhere else. And if you would put them in Chayim, they'll go start their own shul. So in Gullus conditions, you can't really force the issue. You have two people who have to really want Ratzon Hashem, just tell us Psak and start arguing, no, you take the money, you know those types of dinner. Otherwise, it's difficult, and they're still doing a good job, and they're doing their best, and it's never a perfect science in Gullus conditions. But what we are missing, despite everybody's well-intended ishtadlus, is a Sanhedrin HaGadol, where, don't want to quote the Umas Olam, but the buck stops here. the source of that is a different shmooze. You have to have a place where you can't argue anymore. It's not a democracy when you just do what you want. It's Ratzon Hashem, and we're here to interpret it. And you can argue and argue and argue and bring it up to the foot of the Har Bayis and keep going. When you get to Sanjana Godol, this is the Dvar Hashem, and we're paskening, and there can't be any more machlekes. Can you imagine what an incredible advantage that is? That wipes out, not every machlekes, because humans are humans, but wipe out right over them. How can you still be arguing? How can you have tinus? We paskin. Me who's going to say Sanjana Godol didn't have Siyat Shmaya? We're sitting in the Beis HaMikdash. The whole purpose of the whole setup with the Beis HaMikdash and the Kabbanis and that being the center of Ruchnis of the world is that the Sanhedrin can paskin and give over the Messiah and the Dvar Hashem. And we are missing that. And therefore it's fertile ground to anybody who wants to make a machlekes and wants to make a world war, Rachmana litzlan, and want to take the Nakama and do what they want. Ultimately, you can't force them. We're in Gullus. I think that reason alone is a reason that we can daven with a Leiv Shalom, but we really need it. And Mitzvah Shem will be Mekayim, V'zachazen and Enu, B'shuvcha L'tzion Barachamim, and the Shuvcha L'tzion is the Kabbanis, the Avodah, and the Sanhedrin Gadol Mitzvah Shem. USB's on the corner there.
You want? Shem Irgen Shir Torah must have busted like a big shakar to Arvina for the inspiring Joshua. There are USBs from the Rav available on the table near the door. I'd like to give a big shakar to Mr. and Mrs. Dov Nierenberg for sponsoring tonight's shir. To have the exclusive sponsoring a shir or putting an ad in the journal to be mechazik Irgen Shir Torah Sabasa Satara worldwide throughout the year. In honor of the upcoming annual dinner on Monday, August 18th, call 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Ashkach to one for coming. Chananya ben Akashem, and Tzakadosh Baruch Hu L'Zakes, as we said, the figure Hibrim Tar Mitzvahs. Shenem Adonai Chofetz Amatzilka Yadul Ter V'Yader. Al Yisrael v'Rabbanon, Al Yisrael v'Rabbanon v'Talmidim v'Talmidim Kol Manos v'Naisis v'Asalim v'Asar v'Asar Yedon Elohim v'Cholim Shemarav v'Achinu v'Yisrachma v'Chayeri v'Zayin v'Yisrael v'Kanu v'Kanu v'Shmaya v'Ara v'Mramein Yesh v'Mrav v'Shmaya v'Chaim Tzayim Aleinu v'Kol Yisrael v'Amen